Well, we're super excited to be here today, everybody. We are actually going to be talking on the subject of how to write and win grants. We're gonna have an amazing panel discussion with two of our wonderful Sharity experts. So Carol Wick, the president of Sharity Global, couldn't be here today. So my name is Wayne Veldsman. I'm simply a part of the Sharity team and just wanted to hop in and be able to moderate our discussion for everybody. And so before we get going, before I actually introduce Ruth Patrick and Vanita Garvin here, I'm actually going to play a short little video, just a message from Carol, since she couldn't be here with us today. So one moment, let me get that up for us.
Hi, this is Carol Wick, and I so wish I could have been with you today, but unfortunately, I got called to a meeting with members of Congress about ending violence against children. So while I'm at that meeting, I'm handing you off very capable hands of Wayne Veldsman, who works with Sharity, as well as our two amazing panelists today, Ruth Patrick and Vanita Garvin. So I'm excited you're with us. I know you're going to learn a lot about grants. And thank you so much for being here today.
Wonderful, wonderful. So welcome everybody. Today's topic is how to write and win grants. And so we're having a panel discussion. So in today's live webinar, actually, we're gonna be talking about a few different things. If you've been struggling to find and land grants specifically for your organization, you're in the right place. We're going to be teaching you some tips and tricks. If you have questions around, the actual nonprofit space and the process of grant writing, we're here today to answer those questions as well. Everybody, please note that at the bottom of your screens, there are some options for a chat as well as a Q&A. Please be active in those. Right here in the beginning, just get used to it. Go ahead in the chat, pop in where everybody is from. I'd love to see your organization name as well. We can specifically talk to you all and make sure to give customized feedback. But so this is truly a Q&A session today. I'll be asking most of the questions, but if you have some as well, please feel free to drop it down below. Susan, thank you so much. I see you're out there from South Dakota, and super excited to have you. And everybody who's here, please stick around until the end. We do actually have some bonus resources that we'll be telling you all about that you can get totally free access to help grow your nonprofit. And so we're just about ready to start. So I'm actually gonna let the ladies introduce themselves. First off, we have Miss Ruth Patrick. She actually has over 30 years in the nonprofit, actually executive leadership. And so, Ruth, I'll turn it over to you. Tell everybody where you're from and just a little bit more about your experience.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. And again, welcome to everybody, as well as to the participants that keep jumping in as well. Again, as Wayne mentioned, my name is Ruth Patrick, and I have a 30-plus year career in the nonprofit sector with organizations small. When I say small, one-person staff teams to large, and I'm talking 40 to 50 staff size. So a variety of experience and in all levels of organizational leadership as both CEO, executive director, as to include training directors, fund development staff members, et cetera. And in that 30-plus years, gained a variety of experiences, specifically in and around grants and grant writing and fund development that we will share with you.
Great, Ruth. Thank you so much for that. And of course, next up is Vanita Garvin. Vanita actually had an award-winning career in the nonprofit space, spanning over 20 years. We're so excited to learn from you. Vanita, please tell everybody where you're from and just a little bit more about yourself.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Vanita Garvin, and I have been in the nonprofit space again for over 20 years. I've worked in domestic violence, sexual violence, homelessness, child advocacy, and workforce development, holding both executive and senior leadership positions throughout my career. And grant writing for me actually became a necessity as I have honed various other skills as well during my nonprofit career.
Very exciting. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of stories today. Both of you, please feel free to share. But let's go ahead and hop on in. Once again, if you guys are just joining us, feel free throughout. There's a Q&A box at the bottom. There's a chat box. Please drop your questions in there. And if we don't get to them immediately, we'll get to them at the end as well. So for today, we're going to be talking about the entire process of grant writing, how to find grants, how to appropriately, see if they are correct for your organization, of course, how to write them, and then the follow-up as well. So just to get started, Ruth, why don't we start with you? So, grants are a mainstay of all nonprofit revenue. What do these nonprofits need to have in place if they are to be successful in launching into grant funding?
Great question. And oftentimes it is figuring out where to start and how to start. And there's many different pieces to the puzzle. And let me talk initially about having the information that you need to prepare for the process of grant writing. And oftentimes this work can take place well ahead of the first grant announcement you're receiving and or the first words you begin to write on a grant. And that has to do with gathering of information and the gathering of documents. So I will say to all organizations, though, to every staff person, it is important to have a virtual and or actual physical file cabinet, if you will, of information and documents that are connected specifically to your nonprofit organization, that are current, as well as documents that may date back a year or two. And what I'm specifically talking about, and I'll give you a few examples, are financial documents, your organization's 501c3, your tax filings from the past 2 to 3 years. Also to include organizational information, bios on all of your key leadership staff. And when I'm saying a bio, I'm not talking about a resume, but literally a short paragraph that could be used for your staff members, and also board lists. So it is a literally soup to nuts gathering of documents that are important for the organization, so that as you sit down and write and begin the process of writing grants, and you begin to ask the questions and see the questions, you know where to go. And by having either a physical file cabinet or a virtual file cabinet or a shared electronic resource, you're able to save those documents throughout the year. And as a new 990 is updated or your organization's audit is released, they can be placed right into the folder or the file cabinet or the shared Google Drive, so that it is kept up to date. And you think, well, how do I do that? Because it's also a time-consuming process. Once a month, set aside a day to update documents. And I think the other piece to that document is the gathering of things that are helpful, success stories, newspaper articles. And I would sort of, again, say that readiness is oftentimes not necessarily exciting to do, but important to do by having your documents ready to go, so that when you sit down and begin to write, you have a resource and you're able to save some time along the way.
Wonderful, Ruth. I love that comparison to the virtual filing cabinet. And a big tip that I wrote here is that seemingly it's easier to keep up than to try and catch up, right? Be consistently putting documents into these folders, into this virtual filing cabinet, so you're ready to go when you need to launch. Correct. So Vinita, I'll turn it over to you. I mean, Ruth gave us an amazing answer. If you have anything to add for the beginning of the process.
And then as you're beginning to think about grants that you wish to pursue and all, I think it's really helpful to consider kind of a grant writing template where you begin to create some content, the content around what your organization does, what is your mission, what is your purpose. So begin to think about, the content pieces for your organization.
Specific content pieces. And so, coming from the mindset of somebody brand new to grant writing, is there, already some template that you could follow, or do you suggest, just write these things down?
Yes, there's plenty of other examples out there where you can get. I have some in my own personal library of grant content samples that can be used. Yes, and I'll be happy to share those.
Beautiful. Please, everybody, if you would like those samples, just go ahead and drop your email in the chat or in the question. We'll be sure to get that over to you. You can always reach out to us on charityglobal.com as well. We actually had Holly say that she calls it her content bank. She pulls from it for narratives also, actually.
The thing Anita and I have talked about is organizational readiness. And that's just, before that first grant is written, is your organization ready to move into the world? Are you able and are you capable, and do you have the right staff and or volunteers on board to carry out the programs that you're applying for funding for? And oftentimes that question is, are you ready? Maybe a yes right now or no, not yet. And looking at when the no, not yet may come into play. And that's oftentimes a tough thing, is to recognize that the organization may not be ready yet. Looking at what needs to be done within the organization and to be ready to apply for the first grant, whether it be a federal grant, a corporate grant, or a private foundation. And there's different answers to all those questions.
Interesting. And so it sounds like there isn't maybe an answer to this question, but there's almost a time where you switch from being not ready to being ready for all these grants? Is it having all these documents in place, or where does that come into play?
I would dare say we all had to start from somewhere. For example, I'm currently the executive director of an organization that I'm literally building from the ground floor up. I'm the only staff person right now. So right now, I would say that my organization, we're in that early phase of coming up with all these wonderful content pieces. I mean, we have our mission, we have our purpose, but to really begin to put those things down on paper and writing, that is the process that I am currently in to get ready to apply for different grants.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that experience. That I love hearing stories and real world actual experience. And so moving on to our next question here, Vanita, we'll go ahead and continue to hear from you. It actually leads into what you were just saying. But every grant asks for a budget. And so what are the biggest challenges that you see that nonprofits have here? What's maybe the best way to approach developing a grant budget?
I think you have to consider, what are your current revenue streams, and being able to list what your current revenue streams are. That can also include potential revenue streams that you're going to pursue or may possibly have in the pipeline, assuring that your budget is an accurate, as best as possible, an accurate reflection of what it is that you're trying to accomplish, your staffing capacity, different resources and or tools that you need to fulfill your mission and purpose. So I think those ingredients are important for your budget development. Depending on the grant, they may want to see how well you did from the actual proposed budget to your actual. So being able to make sure that you've done a great job of financial record keeping of all your expenses and all will also be very important. And understanding the difference when a potential funder is asking you what is your agency budget versus your project budget.
That's a great point. And I know you and I have both looked at organizations when they have shared with us their agency budget, and in their mind, that's also their program. But I think if we begin to help people see that there is the agency budget that includes program, and then there should be a cost component to finance, and fund development, and those are separate from that program budget. And
Could
it's
you
tough to do.
define the difference for us? I apologize for interrupting you, but what is the difference between the agency budget versus the program budget?
You want me to take that, Ruth?
Go for it. And yeah.
Okay. Well, the overall agency budget is going to give you of course, the overall scope of the agency. That can be the team, the staff, supplies, maintenance, benefits, salaries, and what have you. When you get into the project budget or the program budget, whatever is being requested, you are only share what is needed for that specific project that you're requesting funding for. So for example, if your agency budget is $1 million, your agency budget is going to entail what that $1 million is comprised of. If your grant request is $100,000, then your project budget is only going to be for that $100,000. And what are your plans for that $100,000?
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And so when it comes to, getting these budgets together, so we know it's very important. Ruth, do you have anything to add specifically? I know Benita gave us an amazing answer.
Yeah, let me certainly add a few additional suggestions and tips and techniques is, I think back in my early days as a grant writer, and I wanted to feel comfortable with being knowledgeable and experienced in all facets of it. And it took some time to realize that I needed to work with the key staff members on the team. And though I was the grant writer, that didn't necessarily mean that I needed to have all the experience and expertise. I needed to be able to work with my program director and my finance director within the organization, and and oftentimes the executive director as well, and as a group of 3 to 4 people to begin that process of developing the budget. I may have some information and I needed to be able to tell the story in the grant or the budget, but the program staff members had the true working knowledge of the budget and what was needed to carry out the program as planned. And the finance director or your CFO had the technical knowledge of what additional other related costs, indirect and direct, needed to be built into the program and project budget. And once I realized the importance of the 3 or 4 of us working together, we then were able to build a good working budget for the organization and for that particular project that I, as the grant writer, could write about, but that we as an organization could talk knowledgeably about during a site visit and or a meeting with the funder. And that was a key piece to that whole process. And remembering to include those other players as a part of the budget process. And again, as Benita said, understanding and appreciating the difference between an organization budget and a program and a project budget was helpful and good to know. And then I found that Excel worksheets are my friend during the budget process, and to create Excel worksheets offline and then use that information when uploading information into your grant. Because that Excel worksheet is your working document throughout the grant process for the grant you're working on today, as well as for the grants that you're going to be working on down the road.
Wonderful. Do something to add? I apologize.
Nope, that's good.
Beautiful. And so what Ruth just mentioned was these working Excel documents. Sharity actually has an amazing tool about grant budgeting that I'll share with you all here at the end. But one thing that really just stuck out to me there, Ruth, was you're saying rely on your team, or get support from your team. Don't try to do everything yourself. It seems to me it's almost an impossible task to some feet.
And oftentimes as a grant writer, you're working on a very hard deadline, and it's easy. It's oftentimes easy to do it yourself, realizing, well, you can work late into the night or early the next morning and still meet that deadline. Make sure that you're, giving time ahead of time to be able to meet and talk with the staff. The worst thing that any of us could do is to write a grant in the isolation of our own home office or actual physical office, and the program staff say, we can't do that. Or how do you expect us to add that particular program when we are already working at 110%. Not that we do that, but there's oftentimes a need to connect with the funder, but we need to remember that do we have the organizational, go back to the beginning, do we have the organizational capacity and building a grant team together? And another group and I mentioned that I forgot to mention was the board of directors, including your board, making sure they're aware of your intent and the budget process and the financial aspects of that grant process.
Love it. Thank you for adding that, Ruth. And so we're going to move on here slightly to the process after having landed a grant. And so for everybody who's watching, if you have a question about still the writing process and the beginning of budgeting and getting all your documents together, please feel free to drop it below and we'll answer it. The next question that I have here, Ruth, I'll let you go ahead and start, is that, once you're awarded a grant, you obviously have to follow through on what you said you'd deliver. So what are the most important things nonprofits should do after being awarded the grant?
Let me start with a small celebration. Yes, you should recognize that within your organization, whether it's announcing it to the other members of your writing team or your grant team, but just recognizing the work, and then a brief just internal celebration. And then, as we all know, doing anything in fund development, we need to reach out and thank the donor. And what you should be relying on is your existing relationship with that funder / donor / foundation. And how do they like to be recognized? It could be a telephone call, it could be a text, it could be a formal thank you to them written and signed by your board of directors. One of the things that I did at the nonprofit organization serving pregnant and parenting teens was we made sure at every board meeting, on those monthly board meetings, I would prepare a thank you letter to the donor. And that thank you letter went around the table and every single board member signed the letter as well. Oftentimes in the margins, oftentimes at the backside of the letter, but it made for a personal thank you that wasn't just the electronic letter with a stamped signature that went out to that foundation and to that donor. And that became a really meaningful thank you that became part of the tradition of the organization. Was it also confirmed that the board of directors knew what grants we were receiving, but also had a chance to participate in the thank you process. So, I'll start with saying thank you, celebrating internally, thanking you, and then beginning the process of how do you keep track of what you have just said you were going to do and to report back to the funder. So beginning that process. And I know Benita has others pieces to that she can add to, or we can certainly have a continued conversation on what do we do next.
Go ahead, Benita.
Yeah, one of the things that after the celebration, if you will, that I think is important and critical is to possibly have what I call contract negotiations with the funder. Sometimes it can take months before you hear back from the funder with the favorable, we're going to award you this grant opportunity. I think, unfortunately, the pandemic is a very good example. You may have written a grant before we begun to experience the pandemic, and then you get an award notification 6 or 7 months later, and your whole mode of operation is totally different than what you proposed in that grant application. So one of the things that I would say is to make sure that you are able to deliver what you initially said you were able to deliver. And I personally have found most funders are very open to sitting down and negotiating what remains realistic to deliver on. And that's a really good time to make any kind of adjustments before really getting started. So that's one of the tips that I would like to share.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Ruth, do you have an experience like that you might be able to share or thoughts?
Yeah, and I think about that, and Vinny and I have both been working with some clients in the past several months, and one of those clients, yes, did receive the award letter and was awarded a portion of the grant that they requested. And it was that aha moment of saying, well, we had asked for $100,000 and we received 75. How do we revise our budget? And I think then again, just as Vanita was saying, is that whole contract negotiation can and should happen in partnership, and there should be some discussion. And just because you asked for 100 and now you've got 75, some adjustments can be made on that grant request. And a variety of things happen, whether it's COVID and or other funders come into the table, or you have had some staff changes, and oftentimes that happens. And it's tough to do, but it is part of that process of receiving the grant award. And I think the other piece to it is we all hope that those grants are going to be fully funded, and there will be no's. And I go back to the world of fund development, and I try to take away that it's a no, and it's a no right now. So I take it upon myself as either the executive director or the fund development director to reach back out to that donor within an appropriate amount of time, 1 to 2 weeks, and ask for some feedback of what could be done to that grant request that could improve it. And oftentimes the donor will say, well, there just was not enough financial resources to distribute what was really needed. And so they needed to make some decisions. But asking for a copy of the scoring sheet, asking feedback, asking for a conversation, most donors and funders will provide that. Some will say no, but I also think it's a good business practice to ask of that, and putting it back onto the donor, the funder, to help us all as an organization be stronger in our funding requests. And that's what we want to do. We want to make stronger organizations and stronger cases for our support.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Those are two amazing points there. First one, negotiate with the funder. If your situation has changed, now, to me personally, I won't be afraid to say, our situation has changed, whether it's because of COVID, staff turnover, other funding coming in. You can adjust, which is amazing to hear. And then, of course, asking for feedback. I think whether you, of course, if you don't land it, but even if you do, ask for some feedback around what stuck out, what could have been better, things such as that. Both amazing points, Ruth and Vanita. Thank you both. Wonderful. And then, of course, celebrate and thank them, right? I like to celebrate. I wasn't expecting that one.
Vanita and I even celebrate when grants are finished up and submitted prior.
Yes.
Like, it's a big task. You should celebrate this little small victories of,
small successes. Yes, absolutely.
Give ourselves
wonderful.
Celebrate. Give ourselves for that permission.
Of course. So my next question that I have written down here, we've already answered a little bit, but I was curious around your favorite tricks for really just organizing and writing grants. Vanita, why don't we start with you?
Well, one of the things that I do, I think it's my signature thing actually that I do, is read the request for proposal from beginning to end. And then I write my summation of what is required. And in that summation, it can include things like, okay, how many copies do they need? And how do they want the copies? Do they want the copies in a binder? Do they want them bound? Do they want double space, single space? Making sure that I'm aware of all the attachments. So I really go through that RFP and make what I call my high-level summation of what is required. And then in that high-level summation, I look at each section of the grant and I put a proposed timeline as to when I want each section to be ready in its first draft form. although there are times where you may run that grant up to the last moment, my style tends to be, I'm trying to make it very manageable along the way. So again, my high level summation of everything that's required, and including my timelines for each section. I also, and this may sound funny, but say, for example, again, if they want 10 copies and they want each copy in its own envelope, I may go ahead at the start of that grant and get all those things together because at the end, you're running out of time. So that's already done. So those are some of my little tricks of the trade working on grants.
I love it. One big one that just stuck out to me was setting basically the smaller due dates for each section, not just looking at big overarching due date.
Yes.
Love it. Ruth, it looked like you had something to add.
Yeah, I was going to say, and distributing and assigning that to different people on the team. And I've seen Vanita do that, is, okay, who can go get this and who can acquire this? And that's been really helpful.
That's amazing. Any other sort of tips for staying organized, while you're writing grants? Anything else come to mind, or else I'll move on to another question.
One of my tips, and we've sort of referenced it, is so many of the grants that we're working with right now are online and online submissions. And though it may be tedious, it is really helpful for both the immediate as well as the review process to make that electronic application a Word document and be able to use that internally. And if that means working on 2 computer screens, questions on computer screen left and your Word document on computer screen right, and typing the question and any information that is specific, such as character or word counts, and having that right there in your Word document. A lot of time is wasted flipping back and forth. So go ahead and take the time at the front end and create that Word document, and then edit and share that. You've got then good tracking. I think the other piece that is my other helpful technique is we all spend too many hours reading things electronically and on your computer screen. And at the last review process with your grant, I highly recommend printing it out, actual paper, and reading it old school style. There will be words that your eye leaps over on the computer screen that on that actual paper you will see differently. And the other final step is also asking somebody else who you trust to be a reviewer and an editor for you. I can't tell you how many times my from and my forms have been replaced with the wrong meaning, though they are spelled correctly, that I just gloss over, and another reviewer who has not written the words will notice and say, hey, that's from and that should be form. So that's a common mistake I make, and just my flying fingers when typing. So those are helpful techniques I've learned along the way that really make a difference in making sure that the best product and the best representation of that organization is ready to go to the funder, because that's what they're seeing. They're seeing our product.
It is, yeah, that final product. Truly is. So, one tip I know that I've heard Carol mention so many times is what you just said, Ruth, is work in a Word document, especially if there's that online form. The last thing you want to have happen is you spend all this time writing everything. And when you go to hit submit, internet connection problem, and then it's all gone. Right? That's the last thing we want to have happen. And then, of course, getting some more eyeballs on it, I like too. Ruth?
Funders, I've also reached out to organizations, and if they have a PDF and or something electronic, I oftentimes ask them, do they have questions available in Word? And in most cases, I would say 5% of the time they say yes and will send it to me. The more about you asking for what you can have, in the worst case scenario is they say no, then you can sit there and do the typing yourself. But oftentimes they do have those.
I like it.
I'd like to add, if I may, I know for me personally, working on a grants, I have to be fresh. I'm not going to be very productive if I'm tired or I've been dealing with some other pressing work-related stuff. So I think it's really important to pay attention to your high peak time for writing. At least for me, that seems to work. I mean, sometimes even if I can get a 45-minute nap and then come back and start writing, it just makes a world of difference in my ability to press forward and start getting the grant, the ideas down on paper.
Love it. Right when you're fresh. Yeah. Don't write, try and write at midnight, the last thing you do before you go to bed. Oh my goodness. Love it. Love it. So everybody out there, if you have questions, please start typing them up. I only have about 1 or 2 more here on my side, and then we'll get to the audience. I see some have already come in, some on the Facebook Live land as well. And so we'll get to those here in a moment. But so Ruth, I'll actually go ahead and ask this to you to start. But so many foundations, they will actually say invitation only for their grants. So my question is, how do you get your foot in the door, and maybe where should someone look for grant funding?
I have an official answer to this, and then I have the answer that really came to me this morning, which is the 6 degrees of separation. So many of us are familiar with the Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation. Is to think about that from the foundation and the funder side. Who and how can you find a connection if you don't have a connection with that particular foundation? And I would start with, how can you find somebody either on your organization's board of directors or your staff or volunteers with your organization who may know a staff member, a volunteer, or a member of the board of directors of that foundation? And how can you create or tie together those individuals who may have a connection between the organization and a connection between the foundation when it's invitation only? And to begin to formulate a relationship like we all know we should be doing with donors well in advance of the need to ask, so that you're building that relationship 3 months, 6 months out. And perhaps you as the grant writer don't know directly the foundation manager, but you may have a board member who knows an individual who is perhaps a staff member with that corporate foundation, or somehow connected, and build on those relationships. Have a lunch, have a Zoom call, make that connection. And I think about it's the building of that relationship, so that when the opportunity for an invitation comes along, perhaps you are considered in the next opportunity, and or can put that in a timeline and an appropriate pipeline for your organization's funding.
Of course, focus on building those relationships, right? And 6 degrees of separation, who can you get to maybe refer you, make the introduction for you, right? Such as that. And so Vandita, if you have input on the invitation only, or better yet, of course, where should people start to look for grant funding?
On the invitation only, I would like to add that I think it's also important. Everything, of course, that Ruth has said, we know how important building those relationships are, but if you should find yourself that you just can't quite find the individual that can maybe get you the end, I dare say, go ahead and call and say, can I get 30 minutes of your time? I'd like to meet you, learn more about your foundation. I'd like to try to see if we're a good fit, if we're aligned with your causes. And you begin your introduction that way and start to build the relationship that way if you cannot find the end. I think you have to have thick skin. Like Ruth said earlier, a no is only a no for right now. So as far as finding grants, I think we all are probably very familiar with grants.gov, which provides just a plethora of grant opportunities. Actually, I start my morning with grants.gov. That is my cadence of from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. I'm on grants.gov looking for grants opportunities because things can change overnight. There's a lot of, as we well know, a lot of different grant subscriptions out there, that foundation directory subscriptions out there. Another thing that I also do, I just have so many wonderful colleagues in my circle. So I keep my colleagues informed of different opportunities that I'm looking at. And in the event that something comes across their radar screen, and they can say, oh, this seems like this might be something that Vanita is interested in, and they will send it to me. And I do the same for them. So kind of building up a network of individuals that's in this grant writing space to also be of help to do that grant research for you, I think has been very helpful for me.
And I'll tag on to that, Vanita. And oftentimes in those discussions, I found that you find collaborators as well. And you're having those discussions with your other peers in the community, whether it's through networking meetings and or just sharing of information. And you're able to say, well, what can we do together? And then it's making a stronger community impact within the organization. And that's how I've been part of that. And you may not, oftentimes I forget that that's what the organization does, or maybe I'm not up to date with they've just added in a new program, and that's also helpful. And I think it's a great reminder to operate from the perspective of abundance. And there are so many funders out there, and if we can help each other, again, it's a stronger community.
Love that community. We actually had somebody's input saying that LinkedIn, right,
Yes,
could be a really great vehicle for all of this.
mm-hmm.
My first thing comes to mind is, it actually will show those 6 degrees of separation, which is a beautiful way to go with it.
And I've used, so I've worked with some customers through Sharity, and we use an iWave screening tool, and that is able to screen opportunities, both individuals' wealth screening as well as corporations and private foundations. And that's been a helpful resource. And again, I don't start my morning with grants.gov, Vanita, but I applaud you for doing that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, looks like we have a bunch of questions actually from the audience, both here on Zoom and on Facebook. And so we're going to dive into them. And of course, everybody, I recommend you charityglobal.com. We have a form right there on the homepage as well that you can request a free consultation or just to get in touch with us. And of course, we can direct you to Ruth and Vanita also. So getting towards these questions, and I see even more flowing in. First off, question says, did you go into detail about how to best rely on your team and if you have junior people? I think this is referring earlier to, I think, Ruth, you mentioned to not necessarily go at it alone, right? To actually rely on your team. So how can you best rely on them, especially if you have junior people, and maybe how less experienced people could still help you with the grant writing process?
I go back to that technique that Vanita talked about, is in that high-level summation of what is needed. And as a part of that summation, if there are elements that you can assign or collaborate with a more junior staff member, that can be done that way. So, and I'll think about an example is success stories. It's important to have success stories. They may not be asked for a grant, but oftentimes a success story comment or a quote can be used. And junior members or less experienced members of a staff team can gather paragraph success stories from clients and or from volunteers. And that would be one good way. I think the other thing to remind yourself of is make sure that the person you're asking to do something has the knowledge and experience, and or you need to coach them into being able to do that, and set realistic deadlines. And check back, I think about the success of, you may assign it and it's a month long out, check back and have status updates, whether it's a group gathering or a Zoom meeting, or just a touch point. We're beginning to use within Sharity Basecamp, which is a project management tool, and that is allowing us to communicate with each other on grant projects, but also to assign tasks and see progress. So again, helpful reminders, share simple pieces that can be done, set realistic deadlines, and check and establish checkpoints.
Beautiful. And for everybody out there, what Ruth just mentioned as far as for Basecamp, that is actually something that we are open to helping people with, is staying organized, right? Putting deadlines into everything, and then all those updates and check-in points as well. Benita, I'm curious, honestly, your answer to this question of help around a team. You said, you've been starting an organization sort of from scratch with yourself. So how can you best utilize a team or others to help you?
Well, right now, again, it's only myself as the executive director. However, I am utilizing board members when appropriate, as appropriate, an advisory board of volunteers, a lot of subject matter experts that are serving on my agency's advisory board. And what I have found is it's really good to convene with them and kind of talk through what the grant application is asking about, to hear everyone's thoughts, what their vision is, make sure and determine what commonalities that we have about how we want to present ourselves and how we're moving forward. So if it's not always a kind of like a physical task that maybe you don't feel that a more junior member is quite ready to take on, I would strongly encourage that brainstorming process is, and they will very much appreciate the fact that you asked for their input.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So next, we have a question here, actually, was specifically for you, Venita. It says, back to seeking and applying for grants as a new, smaller nonprofit. I'm working alone and I'm currently holding all board seats. As I began applying for grants, I was asked for the board of directors, filed RS 990EZ, key performance indicators, and annual budget. So the question is, are you also dealing with all of these things, and how are you addressing them?
Was that question saying he or she is holding all the board seats?
Looks like I'm working alone. I'm currently holding all board seats.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I do currently have a small board, but yes, I am going through all of that. It's challenging. It's a new start, and my agency is September 2019. However, I've only been on board since November 2020, so very new. So yes, I am experiencing those challenges. I mean, I know we're going to do good work. I have the vision of the coalition that we want to build throughout the state of Delaware. So I think one of my challenges will be convincing a funder that we have the capacity to do what we want to do, making the case for the funder why you want to be a part of this. I think that's where I'm going to have to do my work, why you want to get in on the ground floor of this opportunity in supporting the organization that I'm currently serving as the executive director. And then, of course, as we build and we have successes, then we begin to document our track record. So whoever asked that question, yes, and I'm more than happy if you would like to reach out for some support and everything and talk through some things. I'll be more than happy to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next question we have is, what are the pros and cons of hiring a third-party grant writer versus having a grant writer in-house? Whoever would like to start, please go ahead.
Let me start the conversation, having been part of both sides of the world. So I've been the fund development director and / grant writer. One of the advantages to that, I believe, for an organization is the access to the person 24/7, if you will. You know, they're a member of the team, they're sitting in staff member meetings, they may be able to attend at the drop of a hat a board meeting. They have working knowledge of the program and the services and see the clients day to day. And there is a lot of value to that, to an organization, when you have the ability to have a fund development person in-house. Oftentimes the organization needs to be big enough to have a full-time fund development person. If it is a shared responsibility, such as grant writer and operations manager, or grant writer and office administrator, I will tell you from experience, it takes a lot of discipline for the grant writing to be the priority and the other day-to-day stuff to allow for the grant writing to happen. So that's a caution of, if you're going to do a grant writing staff member, perhaps do part-time and not wed lots of things that are, I guess, going to challenge the time management of a grant writer. On the side of an independent grant writer, the advantage is you have an independent set of eyes who can ask the difficult questions about why is this program needed, that an outside person has perspective on. And the independent grant writer, again, knowing how Vanita and I and Sharity and the Sharity team work, is when we're working with customers, our job is to help the organization be more proficient and gain grant writing experience, while also being an oversight and a reviewer and helping build structure, and in some cases writing some and or all parts of the grant depending on the customer's needs. So I see the value from the side of where an independent grant writer may take a little bit more time to ramp up, but the skills and the expertise may be at a higher level than what your part-time and or full-time person is. And that's my experience. Vanita, I know you've been in and around lots of additional experiences, and add to that.
Yes, I've been both the in-house grant writer as well as the independent grant writer as well. And I'm in full agreement, Ruth, with what you have said. I think a possible con, since they asked for pros and cons, a possible con would be an agency not really vetting properly the independent grant writer. I know firsthand there are just some things that I personally would not be able to write about because they're just not things that I'm invested in. Like, I wouldn't be able to write a good grant about the environment. Okay. But violence against women, men, and children, homelessness, workforce development, career readiness, all those things I personally love. So I think you have to do your due diligence to minimize any cons that could come with the independent grant writer. Don't be afraid to ask for samples. You know, you ask for a person to see their sample of their work. I think it would be critical to try to minimize any cons. But I do really appreciate, Ruth, what you have said about the pros, because I know for myself as the in-house grant writer for several of the organizations where I've worked, and especially when you're dealing with the human condition of individuals, of the individuals that you're serving, your time is going to be possibly pooled to address that humans need, and then the grant writing is going to get pushed to the side. It will get done, but it's really just hard, I think, to have the grant writer's time internal, just fully focused on the job itself.
Wonderful. Well, we are running out of time here. If there's any last questions, please go ahead and drop them. But earlier I did mention that we do have a free bonus for everybody, and it is specifically a grant budgeting template. Ruth earlier mentioned the importance of having Excel sheets to track your budget to get everything in place. And so this is actually located in Sharity Global's Knowledge Center. So the simplest way to get there is just to go to charityglobal.com. In the top bar, you'll see resources, and just underneath of that is Knowledge Center. So please join the Knowledge Center and get to that grant budgeting template. I'm sure it'll help everybody a lot out there. And so let's make this the last question, unless one more flies in. But somebody asked earlier if you could elaborate a little more on iWave, something I'm not personally familiar with. Or she said, can you elaborate a little bit more on iWave?
I'm going to ask Ruth if she can take that one. I'm still learning a lot about, I'm new to iWave myself. So
iWave is and I will simplify this, and the best thing to do was to Google iWave, and it's the letter I and then followed by the word wave, all one word. It is a screening tool that Sharity has I guess an enrollment with, registration with, that gives Sharity customers an opportunity to have donors screened for major gift asks or capital campaign asks. It also can be used to do research on foundation and corporate entities. And it literally bundles a variety and links together a variety of resources. I am gaining more and more experience with it over the past 6 months. I'm not yet proficient because iWave continues to add new features. So the moment I become knowledgeable is when they add more things, which is great. But it is it's literally an integrated tool that allows for information gathering in an easy way rather than doing multiple Google searches and LinkedIn searches. So I hope that's a good summation of it. And if there's others on the call who have more familiarity, let me know, please, or share that. But again, something I worked on with Sharity customers on a couple of different projects.
Wonderful. So if you're looking for an easy way to find all the information that you need, reach out to us. We're happy to help you with iWave as well. And then the last question here, we'll sneak in right in the last minute. Is what is the biggest difference between writing government versus foundation grants? And how do you know if your consultants can do both?
I would dare say that is where you really attempt your due diligence and trying to see if you can get some examples. Body of work is what I've called it. I have oftentimes given potential clients a sample of my body of work that shows the different range of grants that I have been able to write. So don't be afraid to ask for what is your experience with government grants? What is your experience with foundation grants? Can I see some samples? And preferably the ones that were funded.
And I'll add to that, the government grants are generally much longer in length. And when I government, I'm thinking federal government and or state government. When you get to government, it's then very similar to private foundations and corporate grants, but the state and the federal government grants can be onerous. And the RFP announcement and the grant due date sometimes are pretty short with when it becomes an announcement and when the application window opens. So onerous in terms of questions and detailed with oftentimes short turnaround times.
Yeah, it would be hard to do those in 2 nights. So do not wait on a government grant. Yes.
Do not wait. Well, Ruth and Vanita, I want to thank you both so much for being here today. I'll give you an opportunity for our last final word of wisdom. Last thing from my side, everybody, if you are looking for help, if you're looking for even free resources, visit charityglobal.com. You can check out the Resource Center and then our Knowledge Center as well. Tons of tips to specifically help you grow your nonprofit. And so as we sign off here, Ruth, I'll let you say a final word, and then Vanita will take us out.
I think grant writing can be a fun experience. Take time to get yourself prepared. And I think that's my biggest suggestion is get ready before you sit down to write. And I take that and encourage everybody to do that. Get ready, then write.
And what I would like to say is thanks for the opportunity to be with each and every one of you. And also, although we want the wins, of course, there will be some no's. Do not get discouraged. Again, the no is a no for now. Sometimes it takes 2 to 3 times to write that grant before you are successful. So do not get discouraged along the way. Keep plugging.
Great point.
Well, thank you both so very much. Thank you everyone who was here today. Until next time, have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Thanks, Vanita. Have fun.